Alright, so what I wanted to do here is I wanted to show you guys a little more sculpting, baking normal maps out again. There's actually an extra node you can plug in to get them to show better, and I wanted to kind of show it this time. I just wanted to kind of get you guys seeing how to bake a normal map out. I also want to show you guys how to save images, right? There's more just to get you guys there. A lot of you guys might still be doing some sculpting and things like that. You don't have to bake the normal maps down until you really feel like you're done sculpting. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm just going to do a little bit of sculpting, not a lot. Just on this, I just want to be able to show you a couple of other things and reinforce one or two other things. But we want to do it now to the armor, right? We want to actually do some stuff for the armor. So in this case, I'm just going to turn off. And remember, we've already baked the map down for the other one. So at this point, if you want to, you see the kind of high-res body. You can always just click on that in your scene collection area here. And if you right-click on it, right, you can actually just delete it, and that gets rid of that, right? Now in this case, we don't really want to see the body for now. You can leave it on and show it, that's fine, but let's turn the eyeball off for the moment. Now remember, when you're baking normal maps down, you really need to have two meshes, right? You need to have your low res, because that's what you're going to bake to, and you need to have your high res. The high res is the one that's got hundreds of thousands or millions of polygons. You're really basically just taking the normal directions, right? The direction that each polygon points. Remember, that's its normal direction. We recently had a mini quiz on that. Right? Normal direction is just the way your face is basically pointing. And what a normal map does is it really just takes that direction and it turns it into a color that basically makes it work like a more sophisticated bump map, right? Like so when the light hits the pixels, it illuminates or shades that pixel like it's a polygon there. But it's not, so you don't have to render millions of polygons, and so this is the kind of thing that can run in real time, right? Although any of you guys saw the Unreal 5 demo, that might be over because that Unreal 5 demo on the PS5 was pretty impressive. But basically, normal mapping is that process of taking a mesh that's got hundreds, thousands, or millions of polygons, taking the direction those polygons are facing and turning them into colors. Right? And those actual colors you'll see usually match up to the red, green, and blue of the X, Y, and Z. But also see things like magenta and kind of this neutral purple, which is kind of the kind of zero, if you will, for the normal map. And you'll see teals, because normal directions aren't just up, down, left, right, X, Y, and Z. They're actually in between them also. So normal mapping, when we saw from the bake, you kind of get this kind of rainbow color of information there. But it's really just taking the normal directions of each polygon and turning them into colored pixels. But to do that, you need to be able to compare a low res, which is kind of sending the rays out, right, some search distance, to the high res. So you need kind of two separate objects. The one that's got lots of polygons, the other one that's the low res, has your UVs and all that stuff. So in this case, I do need to duplicate this object. So remember, the scene collection area, if you go to armor here, you can just click on it to make it active, right? And you can right-click on it, and you'll see that you can, of course, copy, right, Control-C. And we can, of course, right-click, Control-V for paste. Now, you can actually name this, right? If you double-click on it, you can call this Armor Low, right, or Low Res, just so that you know that this is kind of the one that's going to be your low-resolution version. Now, that's really there for baking. And if you wanted to use cage baking, what you would have is you'd have two lows, right? You'd have the high-res, which we're going to sculpt in a minute. You'd have this low, and then you can copy that again and paste it just like this, just copy and paste again. And then call that armor cage, and what you can do is you can actually use your sculpting tools or any of your shaping tools, you can move tools to change the shape of that one to match or to be larger than the sculpt detail if you did some sculpt details. And then you could use that as the cage option that you would see in the baking for cycles. So you can actually do cage baking. It's a little more precise. We're really, for this project, not doing as much sculpting as we normally would because distance learning, but I wanted to get you enough that you are at least getting the basics, the fundamentals for it. So cage baking is possible in Blender. We're not going to worry about it for this project. If we were doing things normally, we would. I'd show it, but we'd also probably be in Mudbox still, right? So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the armor, and I'm going to turn the eyeball off for the armor low because we don't really need that one available. And of course, we can go to the sculpting layout, right? Because these layouts are great for that. Go to sculpting layout. And of course, this has its own kind of little kind of properties stack here. Remember modifiers, the blue wrench. We've seen that plenty in our earlier videos. So at this point, guys, you should be somewhat familiar with some of a handful of modifiers at least. And this is where it works a little bit different than Maya, and ways a little bit better. It's actually the way 3D Studio Max works. Blender or Modo kind of works in between. It works like Blender and 3D Studio Max in the sense you don't have normal history. but you can apply modifiers. You just have more modifier options in Modo. So I actually prefer the way Modo, 3D Studio Max, and Blender actually do that. You don't have to worry about cleaning history up and having to bog things down. If you need modifiers or procedural modeling, you kind of opt into it, right? You say, hey, I want to use it, instead of it kind of already being there. So modifiers is kind of that way to get certain modeling operations that are always there available to edit in a non-destructive way. So we're going to add a modifier. Really at this point we've only seen a couple: mirror, right, for getting our symmetry, if you will, and subdivision of surface for getting our smooth preview, right? So remember, we've seen that in several of the other videos. So what we want to use this time is multi-resolution, because this is what you really use for the high-res sculpting. So we'll apply the multi-resolution sculpting, and once that's on, you'll see there's a button called subdivide. And what we can do is we can just hit subdivide, and what it does, it just keeps kind of subdividing the mesh so there's more polygons, right? So that should give us, now in this case, actually I feel like there's still that mirror modifier on this one from the other view, so I'm going to get rid of that. And we're also not on the armor. That might help as well. You saw the kind of armor wasn't there. So let's make sure we're actually properly on the armor when we add our modifier. So we go to multi-resolution. And that's not working. I think it's that mirror is getting in the way for us. If we go back to modeling, we might find that if we go to 4 for object mode and click on the object, right? So even when you select it here, keep in mind that it doesn't always properly select it here. You'll see that their mirror modifier is still on. That can sometimes do weird stuff when sculpting. So at this point, we've kind of got the UVs laid out from earlier videos. Remember, you can just hit apply to make these modifiers final, right? It actually makes that geometry real. So now when we go to sculpting, and I'll actually go to do that for the armor low as well, just apply, just so we're kind of good there. All right, so we'll go back to sculpting, and now we can go to add modifier, multi-resolution, and then you see when we hit subdivide, you'll see the actual polygon resolution gets smoother, right? As we keep adding subdivisions, and this gives us the ability to sculpt. Now, if you do look down here at the very bottom, you'll actually see how much memory is being taken up by this, how many objects we have in our scene, 3, right? And you'll see how many triangles are actually here. So by subdividing this 4 times, because I subdivided it and the render level says 4, you'll see that we're actually at 2 million triangles, right? Now, my computer can handle more than that. I'm sure many of you guys' computers can handle more than that. If yours can't, don't sweat it, right? Like I said, do some sculpting. If you can't sculpt everything, that's fine. If you're on a Surface Pro, you might find that getting up to 2 million might make your Surface Pro explode, like your school device. So just keep that in mind, is that it's about more that you guys are playing with some sculpting, not that you're always getting every little super fine detail. But the higher the resolution, the more triangles, the nicer the detail looks, the more detail you can add. And this, we really just wanted to show a couple of things like masking and like some of our stroke features, right? So in this case, what I'm going to do is I want to show you guys how you can kind of do rivets, right? So the way you can actually do rivets is based on a stroke. So you can always just kind of do your regular draw brush, right? It's kind of just your top one in sculpting here, right? And what we can do is we can go to stroke. And you'll see, actually, sorry, it should be, no, stroke should be out. So we go to stroke method, and you'll see we click on space, and that's what it normally is, and that's fine, that's the way it normally behaves. But you see you have things like dots and drag dots, right? And there's even things like anchored, right? You can even do lines and curves, so if you kind of turned on line, you can actually kind of do a little bit of a line here, and it sculpts a bit of a line. Now in this case, there might be a bit of sculpt texture on there, so I might go to texture here, and so there's actually a texture, so I might just kind of get rid of that and click on that X. You guys might not have that. I just had that from last time, right? That's how you use stencils and stamps, right? Based on if you have it set to view plane or stencil, basically. So view plane and stencil kind of give you your, view plane will give you stamps, particularly if you use the space section with spacing. That'll give you your distance between stamps. And stencil, of course, is how you use stencils. So we'll go to stroke, and we can, of course, switch to something different. Like I said, if we did line, you see how I can kind of drag a line, and it actually sculpts a line. So that's kind of cool, right? Kind of neat. You got like a line one. I haven't really played with curve yet, but I believe you can actually, like in Modbox or Modo, you can actually draw a curve, an actual real curve, something we just didn't do for this project, right? Because we didn't need it for the character. And there's only so much we're doing with distance learning, right? and you should be able to like kind of use the curve that's there as a stroke. I believe that. I'm not 100% sure, right? I'm getting pretty good with Blender, but I don't know everything about it quite yet. But you have these stroke methods. And one of the cool things is that you have things like anchored and drag dot and line that can be pretty neat. Space is kind of usually default. But if I turn drag dot on, right? And remember, you can use your brackets or S, right? To kind of drag up or down, right? And click. Of course, radius is right there as well. And you can see this has got a texture as well, so I'm just going to get rid of that one, right? So remember, just click on that. When you go to texture, click on the X, it gets rid of it. It'll still be loaded in here, though, right? So you're just kind of turning it off for this. But if you click on the kind of little checkerboard one, that kind of pops that up. So now you see if we have drag dot, what we can do is you can see how we can kind of drag some dots. Now, depending on how hard you want that to be, right, you can go to fall off, and it's set to smooth, but you can actually set it to constant. You can actually also kind of play with custom if you wanted to adjust this on your own. I would say kind of maybe just use constant should be fine. And of course, we could always do a little bit more strength for our brush sculpt here, so I'll kind of maybe set that to 0.7, right? Make our brush size a little smaller though. And you'll see that, and of course, as I went around changing that, things got turned back off, so I'll turn that off, turn that back to drag dot, right? Turn that back, so kind of when I changed strength and did some other stuff, it kind of screwed it up a little bit. But now you'll see how it actually drags a much harder dot. Actually, I think it was just because I undid too far, believe it or not. So that might have just been I undid too many times, yeah. So sometimes if you undo too far, it'll do that. So just keep that in mind, that if you undo too far, you might have to go back and just switch those things again. But drag dot, set that fall off to constant, and you can start to get yourself kind of some rivet details, right? Kind of neat. There we go, kind of get some little rivets in here. So it's kind of neat that you can actually do that kind of detailing. And like we said, if you want, you can have a kind of a smoother one, right? Or more of a spherical kind of one like this, which actually works out quite well too. So really, you can see that this can be a great way to just do little riveting detail on stuff, right? So drag dot does that. What's interesting about anchored, if you turn that on, is you'll see that when you click, you can just kind of drag it up or down, right? Kind of left or right. So whereas drag dot, they're always the same size, this one gives you the ability to just kind of drag to twist and do other stuff. Easier to see what the effect fully will be when you, because it can allow you to twist it also if you have like an image on it. But I wanted to start to get you guys to see that you have some neat features with strokes, right? And that you have some kind of cool features with fall off also, right? So ultimately, the sculpting tools, and you can actually use many of these for texturing as well, are pretty cool, right? So you can see that gives us some basic sculpting. Remember, when you're in the sculpting layout, your actual symmetry is already on, right? Believe it or not, multi-resolution won't work with mirror modifier blowout. At least everything I've tried with it. The moment you have mirror modifier and multi-res together, multi-res overrides the mirror, particularly the sculpting viewport here. So it is kind of one of those things where, in theory, you can actually sculpt and box mount at the same time, but in practice, without the mirror modifier, it kind of doesn't really work the way you want it to. But when you're in the sculpting actual layout, symmetry is already on. Because here it's not using full modeling symmetry. The mirror modifier actually allows you to do extrusions, bridges, all the normal features. This is really more for shaping, right? So this symmetry functionality right here, it's also kind of on your tool brush as well, right? Kind of right in here stuff. That's really much more for shaping than it is for full modeling, right? You can do shaping on both sides and it works great, but the moment you try to extrude or bridge or add edge loops on both sides, you're going to find it's not going to work that well. All right, so I want to make sure you guys got to see that you have stroke. Remember, I want you guys to try to do some sculpting, but kind of pick and choose, right? As long as you're doing some sculpting on stuff and you're banging some normal maps down, I'm going to be pretty happy with that, even if it's not super detailed or tons and tons, but you're at least showing me you're getting the fundamental ideas and things like that. So stroke, right there, the stroke method, you have some cool options. And of course, there's other options here like randomizing with jitter, spacing, right? Particularly if it's the space one. The moment you change to other ones like drag dot, you saw spacing goes away. And of course, fall off is kind of like the hardness or softness of the brush. And you can even, of course, add images to these, right? So in this case, one of the other things I want to show you guys was down here at the very bottom, right? There's all these sculpt tools on the side here. Feel free to experiment with some of them, right? You'll notice that there is masking down here, right? So what we can do is we can click on mask, right? And what we can do is we can actually go in here and paint a mask. Now this is a lot like Mudbox's freeze, right? Some of you guys remember when we showed a little bit how the freeze brush works in Mudbox for paneling on our spaceship. That's what this does, right? So you can actually go in here if you want to and kind of do a little bit of paneling shapes just by masking off, right? And I'm not going to try to go too crazy with this. It's more just showing ideas off, and I did want to show you guys how to bake a normal map and plug it in properly better this time, and stuff like that. So with these masks, what we can do then is you'll notice that we can actually go up to here, because you'll notice in the sculpting menu there's sculpt options here, but there's also mask, right? So there's actually a little mask menu here. Just like if we were modeling, right? We have kind of these guys right here. We go back to sculpting and we see masks here. And you see you could fill mask, you could clear mask, right? So if you want to get rid of it, if you want to invert mask. And this actually uses a lot of the ZBrush quick keys for that as well, right? So at least when industry compatible is on, right? That's the whole idea behind industry compatible is it's using a lot of workflow and quick keys from a lot of industry standard software. And part of the reason those things do that is one, it's just some of it's just established and it works and people can learn Blender easier because of it. Some of it's just because they're better than the old Blender stuff, right? So what you can do is you can invert this mask, and then what we could do is we could actually switch to a different brush, right? So we've got a lot of brushes here. We have the inflate brush, right? And we kind of remember seeing some kind of similar brush like bulge inside of a Mudbox, right? And I'm going to make this brush a lot bigger, right? Make the size quite big. And what I can do is I can then kind of go into the areas that I want to work on. And what we can do is we can kind of sculpt them out a little bit. So it kind of inflates them. So this can be kind of a cool way to kind of inflate them out along their normal directions to kind of do interesting shapes that kind of have that same size, right? So remember, you have the ability to paint masks right down here. And you'll notice that we actually have box mask, some actual box hide features if you want to hide some of your sculpted geometry. So remember, the whole left side has a lot of brushes, including your masking brushes. There's even a masking menu, right? We can clear mask now. We can probably switch back to the regular draw brush, right? The brush size is a lot smaller. And now you see we can mask, and we can even use things like the inflate brush, right? Or the bulge brush, right? Or blob, I should say. Inflate works pretty well, though, for that stuff. And you see we can kind of pull out shapes off of the surface to do kind of other little paneling things. At this point, the only other thing, like I said, you can really do if you wanted to add a little more sculpting before I kind of show you guys how to bake this out again, is simply with just the regular draw brush, right? We could always go back into texture, and in this case, if you wanted to add a whole new texture, you click on new, right? And then you can kind of, and in this case, it's kind of giving us a new one. I'm actually going to get rid of that. You actually go to here, right? This is where it gets a little bit confusing a little bit, right? It's kind of a little easier to kind of load in all the textures here. So I'm just go down to the little kind of red checkerboard in this area. And we click on new, right? And what that does is that's going to give us this. And this is the important part because we actually have the opening settings here, right? Because you'll notice we don't really quite have these here, right? Sometimes it's easier to actually, if you want, you can create the new texture from here, but then you're going to have to load it from here, right? So this little kind of red checkerboard at the very bottom, you can create new texture there, hit open, and this is where you can go browse, right? So I could go to folders. I've already had some that I've loaded in, right? These would be your folders of your textures. In this case, I think I'll just load that one in again. An image, there it is. And then you'll see when we go to texture here, we can click on this guy right here, right? And you'll see that it's set up to kind of grab that one, right? Now, of course, we could always just use view plane, right? And then that'll kind of just sculpt it like stamps if you want to use it that way. If you want to give it a little more space, right, use the stroke method space and turn the spacing up, and it'll stamp further apart, right? So we can kind of turn that up to like maybe 40%. You see how it stamps a little further apart. So just regular load and texture with either view plane or tiled, right? I like view plane a little bit more. With a little bit of space for your stroke actually gives you stamps, right? But if you wanted to, you could always switch your mapping to stencil, right? And then when you've got stencil, you see it brings your stencil up here. Now, at this point, you hold down right mouse button to move it, right? And then it's control right mouse button to rotate it, and shift right mouse button to scale it, right? So it doesn't quite use the Mudbox quick keys, but it has its own, right? Right mouse button for move, shift right mouse button for scale, right? And control right mouse button for rotate. And what this will do is this will really give you the ability, like we expect, to kind of just sculpt just that on, right? And see how you can actually sculpt whatever kind of cool detailing you want from that stencil. Of course, I can make the brush size a little smaller if I want to and sculpt that in. So you can use stamps or stencils, but it's kind of up to you on what you wanted to use for it, right? But it is one of those things where you can actually do some cool sculpting like that with things that you're actually familiar with, right? We actually did see stencils and stamps on our previous project in Maya Mudbox. So from a concept standpoint, nothing really new. You're just figuring out how to do it in Blender, just like we did a lot of extruding, right, to build our base mesh for our character. We did some adding of edge loops, right, and we know extrude and multi-cut from Maya already. We just had to figure out where Blender puts those tools, which, by the way, in the modeling menu, on the left side, you do actually have your loop cut tool right here with its own default quick key, Alt-C, that makes it so that you can add edge loops without going to edge mode, right? So you might prefer using it that way. I just want to make sure you guys know how to get to it through the menus first and foremost. So sculpting-wise, we're good there, and then I can just always, turn this back to view plane or tiled, depends on what you want it to be. We could always kind of turn that texture off, and now we have some sculpting, right? So just wanted to kind of remind you about some of your tools, right? If you wanted to, you can even see that there is kind of the crease tool. So if you want to add a little bit of creasing in some areas, right, you can kind of always make the brush size a little smaller. Remember, size is right there, but S or the bracket keys can kind of change the size. And you can add a little bit of kind of sharpening for like wrinkles or folds if you wanted to. Kind of neat to know that you have those there, and you can kind of do some cool stuff with that if you wanted to. Maybe a little bit of a crease there, maybe kind of one there. It's kind of cool to add a little bit of kind of those little details. All right. So just kind of trying to remind you guys about some of the tools you have available to you and the brushes here, including masking, but also kind of strokes, fall off, texture, and kind of the mapping types, the stroke methods, and that can change the behaviors to give you what you'd expect from, say, like Mudbox. Because at this point, we're sculpting like we would do a Mudbox. All right. So now what we want to do is go to the shading menu here. All right. So I'm going to click on shading, and this is going to take us over to our sculpting one. Now, at this point, it's probably going to be a good idea to make sure to kind of turn the eyeball on for the other armor. And we don't really need it for the high res because we've got that set for sculpt. We'll click on the low res here. Remember, 4 is object mode, so you can always kind of click it here or whatever. You might want to make sure to go into the material area, right? Right above the kind of reddish pinkish checkerboard is kind of a reddish pinkish kind of checkerboard ball. If you click on that, that actually shows your materials. And what you can do is you can name the materials, but you can even create new ones, right? Or apply already existing ones, right? You can kind of see there's only one already here for the body stuff. So in this case, I think I'll create a new material, and we'll call this armor, right? There we go. And of course, you can click and you see there's other ones here as well. So I could have named the other one before. But that way we've kind of got a little bit of a distinction between those. And you can see that by default it's set to principled, which is a pretty accurate, realistic Pixar-developed shader material. It's got metallic and specular controls, just like you expect from Arnold. And now you can see if we kind of go over here, we should be able to kind of just re-click on this, make sure it's at the armor. We don't want the normal map plugged in for this one. So what we'll do is we'll kind of delete that one for the moment. And what we want to do is we want to create a normal map to bake out, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Add, and we're going to go to Texture, and what we're going to do is we're going to create an image texture, right? We want an image, right? So we just go to the Add menu in Shading. It's kind of this little area here. We go to Add, Texture, Image Texture. There we go. And there's our image texture. And what we could do is, of course, we could create new. And you see how I kind of saved that last one from last time. Once you bake it out, you'll see it here. And you'll actually see right kind of here that you can actually save it out if you want to, right? So you can actually go to this little kind of 3-bar pull down, go to Image, Save. So once something's baked, you can actually save that image out, right? So in this case, we're just going to click on New, and we're going to call this Armor, right? Armor Normal or something like that, something that makes sense, right? Armor Normal. There we go. Of course, we'll make it a high enough resolution. 2048 should work reasonably well for yours, but if for whatever reason you have to go with a 1024, that's fine too. Or if you want to go 4096 to make it even bigger, that's fine. We want it to be blank. We'll leave it the non-32-bit. Hit OK. And there we go. We'll have an actual proper texture. And in fact, you'll see there's now an armor normal right there, right? And you can just kind of see it here, but it's there. We don't have to plug it in yet. And there's actually kind of a little bit of an extra node you can plug in and have it show up better on the viewport. Now at this point, what we want to do is we want to select our armor first, and then hold down Shift to select our armor second, right? So that's active. See how it's kind of orange instead of like a darker orange than a lighter orange? That means it's the active one. So you select the high res first, and then the low res second to kind of let it know the low res is the active you want to bake it to. Now this is where we go back to our renderer, and it's the one that looks like it's right below the screwdriver and wrench. It's kind of this little area here, so we'll click on it, right? And these render properties right here are your render properties, right? Now, normally the render engine that's better is than an Eevee one, right? But Cycles is where you can get your baking stuff, right? So you do click on the one that looks like a little bit like a microwave or a briefcase, kind of right here. It's the one above it looks like a printer icon. And you'll just switch the rendering engine from Eevee to Cycles because that's going to allow you to bake. So what we can do is we can scroll down to the bake section, right? Make sure to open that up, right? It's right here, bake. And you see we've got the bake set to bake type set to normal, right? You can click on it, pick what you want. You can bake lots of different map types, so we're just baking normals. And what we want to do is, if you want to use cage, right, you could. In this case, we're not. We're just going to use the ray distance. And it's actually set up from last time, right? It's set up for the distance from the last baking we did. So the nice thing is, at this point, you know, we're in pretty good shape, right, for that stuff. So we'll hit bake. And then you see it's going to kind of go through here and it's going to bake this. It looks like it's trying to bake the body normal though, which I didn't want it to. So, I might have baked over that. That's okay. So in this case, you just want to make sure that you have the proper materials placed on everything. I might have had a different map type there, but you see it actually baked all that stuff out, right? So you can click here, and you see how it's got an asterisk, because you can go and you can save as. So in this case, I'm going to save as, because I already have the body map normal, so I'm just going to save this as something totally different. I'm just going to call this armor, right? There we go. Save image as, and there we go. All right. So in this case, it's baked down. We'll turn the eyeball off with the high res. And we can switch our rendering engine back to Eevee if we wanted to. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're on armor low. Kind of go to material here. We can see it's using armor material. There's our armor normal map, right? It's kind of got that all plugged in. If we want, we can always create a new one or just browse to make sure it's the proper one, right? So should load that in. Let's see here. Might be want to use that one. Let's see here. Double check there. Save as. Yeah, there's no armor on map. Okay. I might just create a new one of these then. Or just go to kind of new, right? So in this image thing, you just click on this guy right here for new. Well, see, that's already what we want it to be. I think I'm going to have to load the new one in. So let's go here. And we'll go see there. Yeah, no. So new. Open. Let's make sure to load that one in. There we go. Okay. And then if we click here, we should see the other one in there. Come on, why am I not seeing that? You're being a little silly there. Alrighty, let's delete that guy. I'm just going to add a whole new one. Texture, image texture. There we go. Let's see if it's loaded in there. Nope. Let's go to open. Load it in this way. There we go. It keeps wanting to see that as that one, which is really annoying. Anyways, all right. So what we can do is we actually want to create an intervening node, so this actually look better. Because you notice when we plugged it on last time, it kind of overrode some of this cool shading you get with the default kind of viewport shading and render, right? So keep in mind, switch back to public Eevee. And what we can do is we can actually add, right, again. And what we can do is there's actually an area called vector, not texture, because that's where we got our image texture from, right? Vector is really just an intervening node that's going to control the normal mapping functions. So what we can do is we can go to normal map, click, and this gives us a normal map node. Kind of like what we did a little bit, for some of you guys who were here for me the whole year, how we actually did normal mapping before, right? How we plug normal maps in. You have strength control and all that stuff. So we'll just left click drag on this blue dot and we'll plug it into, I'm going to move this up a little bit. Drag this purple dot, plug it into the purple dot for normal. There we go. And then of course we can plug in the yellow for color to the yellow for color here. And you see how the normal map actually shows up pretty nice on there, right? The only thing you have to keep in mind is that, let's see, what was it? I'm trying to remember. You need to pick UV map also, right? So you see how kind of this little pull down right here? You have to tell to use UV map. I should be using that better. Let's make sure. Let's see there. It's looking okay. sRGB should be fine. Although we might just want to do raw. There we go. Just set it to raw. There we go. Very much like we would do this stuff in Arnold, right? You just want to make sure the color space isn't off, right? So you can see this is working very much like Maya. And now you can see the normal map looks just kind of a lot better in viewport here. All right, so that'll be a great place, I think, to stop for today. We'll do coloring in our next video later this week, and that'll be all that. And then we'll kind of do one more video at the beginning of next week. That'll be lighting and rendering, so you just can finish up your stuff.